We know that Toy Story is getting a sequel in the coming years. I don't know why. I feel like Toy Story 4 ended with Woody's story. Obviously, Andy's story ended at Toy Story 3. I don't know what you can tell in Toy Story 5, but we know that's getting a sequel. As for the Toy Story game, not so much. Welcome, everybody, to JJ9 News, where we talk all things NFL all the time. I'm Jared Gare, and I represent the 904 from the 602. And today, we are talking about one of the weirdest and most controversial broadcasts of the 2020 season, the Toy Story game, and its future for the 2024 NFL season in the wake of the NFL schedule getting released. Now, I talked about the Toy Story broadcast last year. When it happened, I had the absolute displeasure of watching that game as a replay. Obviously, I watched the Jaguars-Falcons broadcast in real time with the real broadcast as a Jaguars fan, as a sane individual. But I watched the replay of Jaguars-Falcons on the Toy Story broadcast afterwards, and it was one of the worst broadcasts I have seen. There were so many technical issues that it was impossible to actually watch the game. There were many, many times during the broadcast where you couldn't tell what was happening, or they just made up plays that very clearly couldn't happen. Like it would say that the Jaguars lateraled the ball 3 times when it was just a regular handoff up the middle. There were a lot of glitches. The announcers were not very good. They talked way over the kids' heads and brought up some things like zone schemes and blitzes and cover 2 and cover 3. Like, it didn't make any sense why they brought some of that stuff up for young kids just watching their first football game ever. It was a disastrous broadcast with so many technical issues. Somehow got nominated for a Sports Emmy. I don't know how. They haven't announced the winners yet, but I hope to God it doesn't win because that was absolutely terrible. Nothing worked. I talked about that game, though. If you do want to watch my review of it, my very in-depth review, where I break down everything that happened, everything that went wrong, because there was a lot that went wrong, I'll leave a link in the upper right corner and a link in the description down below. However, the Toy Story game last year was a simulcast. It was an ESPN Plus exclusive game last year because that was Jaguars-Falcons. And timing-wise, it made sense for that to be the Toy Story game because it was taking place in London. It was 9:30 in the morning. Kids could get up for that and watch. No parent's going to be upset if their kid is up at that hour, or 6:30 on the West Coast. No one's going to be upset if their kid's up at that hour on a weekend. They can watch that game because they're not doing anything that day. It's a perfect time for kids at that age. They're up at that hour. But this year, what was interesting was that when the schedule came out, there were no ESPN Plus exclusive games in London. NFL Network had all 3 games in London this year. They've got the game between the Jets and the Vikings. They have the game between the Jaguars and the Bears, and they have the game between the Jaguars and the Patriots. So ESPN Plus will not do that game. That was a surprise on the schedule because 2022 they had an ESPN Plus exclusive game with Broncos-Jaguars, and 2023 they had an ESPN Plus exclusive game with Jaguars-Falcons. The only ESPN Plus exclusive is the Cardinals-Chargers game this year, and that's a Monday Night Football game as part of their doubleheader at 9 p.m. Eastern. And obviously, you're not doing the Toy Story broadcast during that because it's too late. You're not doing it for a lot of other reasons, but I want to talk about the timing first, because a game that starts at 9 o'clock Eastern would make no sense to do a Toy Story broadcast for, because the primary audience for this game is young kids. You're not doing a game on a school night designed for kids because it defeats the purpose of the target audience. It goes completely against the audience. You're not going to get anyone because no one in that demographic will be allowed to be up and watch the broadcast on the East Coast and even the central part of the country, maybe even the mountain time, because they have school the next day. Maybe it would be somewhat different if the ESPN Plus game was taking place on a day where Tuesday is a federal holiday, but it's not. It's the same reason why back in 1968, NBC really wanted to make sure that Heidi aired at 7 o'clock Eastern on the East Coast, and they cut away from the Jets-Raiders game. It's the same reason why in 1979, when the Broncos-Patriots game was a blowout, they decided to flip off that game and put on Disney's Wonderful World and put on a movie there because it would end before 9 o'clock Eastern. Because kids are the primary audience. Kids are watching that, and they're not going to be allowed to stay up past a certain hour, probably past 9 o'clock, because they have school the next day. They might be saying, well, what about the Do Perfect games? Because the Do Perfect game, they do Thursday Night Football with ease. You might say, okay, well, Do Perfect does the games at night, and that's not an issue. I mean, it is an issue because the broadcasts are terrible, but that's not an issue. They get their target audience to watch. Well, that's different. The target audience for the Do Perfect game is drastically different because, number one, they're actually watching the football game as it's happening in real time. Granted, it's in a very, very small corner of the screen, but they are watching it. But that is aimed more at young kids in that 8 to 14-year-old range versus the Toy Story broadcast, which is aimed at very, very little kids who want to see toys and their favorite Disney characters moving all over the field. They don't really know football. The Dude Perfect broadcast, the people watching that, they like watching Dude Perfect, but they probably know football because Dude Perfect has done a lot of football videos on their channel, and the audiences kind of overlap for that. Toy Story, maybe not so much. So you're not going to do a game at that time slot for Cardinals-Chargers because it would end past midnight on the East Coast, which is way too late for younger kids. It defeats the entire purpose of the target audience. It's the equivalent of airing an all-new documentary about the history of the Tony Awards at the same time that the actual Tony Awards are on. No one's going to watch it in real time because they'll just watch the Tonys. It's the same thing here. No one's watching the Toy Story broadcast because they've got other things, other responsibilities, which is go to bed because you have school the next day. On top of that, even if you do ESPN Plus exclusive Cardinals-Chargers like you did Jaguars-Falcons last year, I'm not sure it'd be possible to do a Toy Story game because that's one of 2 games taking place that Monday. That's one of the 4 Monday night doubleheaders that ESPN and ABC have. So you have a game on ABC, a game on ESPN Plus, and then you're going to do a third crew to do the NFL for the ESPN Plus exclusive. Booger McFarland was the color commentator for that Jaguars-Falcons game in London. He's going to be probably in the studio. They'll probably need him. They'll probably need him at some point during the broadcast on ABC or for the ESPN Plus game. They'll need him at some point in the studio in Bristol or on location at one of the sites. So he can't do the game. So you have to basically start from scratch if you're going to do it. And again, because of the time, you're not going to do it. The only one that they could conceivably do it in is when they have a doubleheader, Jaguars-Bills in week 3, since that starts at 7:30 p.m. Eastern. Maybe some kids are allowed to be up by 10:30, but that might actually be worse because, again, you have the doubleheader aspect of it. So it's the same issue of Cardinals-Chargers. You won't have enough bodies there. But on top of that, Jaguars and Bills are East Coast teams, so that game ends at 10:30 for fans. At least Cardinals and Chargers are West Coast teams, so that game's starting at 6 o'clock in Arizona, 5 o'clock in Los Angeles. So that game is going to end at 9 o'clock or 8 o'clock for fans, so you could theoretically stay up for that versus Jaguars-Bills where you might not be able to stay up for that. So it looks, based on the fact they didn't get a London game, they don't have an early game, and just based on the time, it looks like the Toy Story broadcast for 2024 is dead. We haven't gotten any confirmation, but based on how the schedule played out, I would be flabbergasted if ESPN actually brought back the Toy Story game because the timing wouldn't make any sense because no kids would be able to watch that game because the target audience would all be asleep because they have school the next day and they have responsible parents. So Toy Story game, probably not happening in 2024. We don't know about Dude Perfect yet. They said on Twitter, they actually replied to me on Twitter, they said they're coming back. We haven't heard any announcement yet. No announcement on Nickelodeon. I'm assuming they're coming back, but they don't have a Christmas game this year. They might do a playoff game. They might do Thanksgiving. I don't know what they're going to do for the Nickelodeon game, but that will definitely be brought back after the rave reviews they've gotten over the last 4 years and how well they did the Super Bowl. They're coming back at some point. We don't know when, but Toy Story, at least for 2024, might be dead in the water, and that is a good thing if the technical glitches were going to be as bad as it was in 2023. Not a bad concept, but you got to go back to the drawing board on this one. You got to go back and start over because this is, the 2023 game was not very good. The 2023 broadcast was not very good. It was more confusing than anything, and it doesn't look like ESPN is going to bring that back in 2024. It's going to go on hiatus at least for 1 year, barring anything crazy. But what are your thoughts on this? Do you think the Toy Story game will come back? Do you like or dislike the Toy Story game? Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below. And if it comes back, what game do you think it's going to come back for? Cardinals-Chargers, ESPN Plus exclusive like it was for Jaguars-Falcons last year? Or do you think it's going to be a different Monday night game? Let me know your thoughts down below. That is going to do it for this episode of JJ9 News. Be sure you like and subscribe. It helps the channel out a lot. And we've got tons of scheduled content coming out every hour on the hour for the next day. And a lot of videos coming out for the weekend and stuff. So be sure to like and subscribe, hit the notification bell, and check out my main channel, JaguarGator9, where we talk all things NFL history all the time. Until next time, this is JaguarGator9 signing off. And as always, go Jags.